The rain hammered against the vast glass roof of the greenhouse dining room, bada, a noisy screen attempting to drown out the silence that always settled over our Thanksgiving table. It was in this cold, gleaming room, surrounded by my father's precious, climate-controlled orchids, that the words finally broke me. My father, Robert, raised his wine glass, the condensation dripping onto his hand like a small, sad tear. He beamed at my sister, Ashley, sitting beside him. To Ashley. For her call back? A true star in the making. I set down my fork, the metal clicking against the fine china. A sharp sound in the manufactured quiet. I pushed the municipal contract toward him. I just secured the municipal contract, Dad. It saves the nursery $25,000 this quarter. He did not blink. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression flat and dismissive, confirming a lifetime of neglect in one casual glance. At Thanksgiving dinner, my parents told me, your job is to work while your sister enjoys life. If you have a problem, there is the door, I said. Fine, I will leave, and you can start paying your bill. Simple as that. That was the line. Emily, the original character, had been the scapegoat. I, Caleb, was the structural support beam. We were built for labor, Ashley was built for display. For 29 years, Boda, I had internalized the narrative that my professional success, my advanced degree in landscape architecture, my brilliant urban designs, was only valuable insofar as it maintained their fragile little world. I was the financial dam holding back the river of their incompetence. Ashley, meanwhile, was the golden child, Boda, allowed to lease convertibles and rent penthouse apartments using the money I earned and the trust fund I did not yet know existed. My chest constricted, but I did not scream. Screaming was for children. I was calculating. I stood up, moving slowly, deliberately, giving them all the time in the world to understand the gravity of the shift. I unclipped the heavy master ring of keys from my belt. These were the keys to everything: the delivery trucks, the inventory lockers, the safe, the specialized climate controls. Boda. They were the physical embodiment of my absolute control over their lives and their business. I dropped the ring. It fell with a sickening, wet thud directly into the bowl of hot, buttery mashed potatoes that Susan had spent 2 hours making. The keys sank, instantly smeared with cream and starch. Then the soil is on its own, I said, my voice low, steady, and utterly empty of emotion. I did not wait for the inevitable explosion. I turned my back on the stunned silence, on the expensive white tablecloth, Bada, on the wilting smiles of Robert and Susan, and on the confused frown of Ashley. I walked out of the climate-controlled greenhouse and into the freezing Portland rain. The November air hit my face like a slap, Boda, cold and clean. I did not close the heavy, reinforced glass door behind me. I left it wide open, Boda, a black rectangle gaping against the interior glow. The sound of the hammering rain, which had always been merely background noise, now became a clock. I knew the physics. I had designed the greenhouse environment myself. The temperature would drop 3 degrees every 10 minutes. The draft would hit the prize Cattleya orchids first. Those orchids were delicate, high maintenance, and worth $400 a stem. By the time Robert realized the thermal seal was compromised, the damage would be irreversible. Cellular rupture from the cold. Complete inventory loss. I walked to my car with a steady, measured pace. Running would imply panic, and I was not panicking. I was calculating the exact coordinates of my emancipation. The cold rain soaked through the thin wool of my Thanksgiving coat. But I did not feel it, or rather, I chose not to acknowledge the sensation. I focused only on the reliable, grounding hum of my car engine as I turned the key. I put the car in gear and drove, the windshield wipers slicing back and forth like a metronome, counting down the last seconds of Caleb Sterling, the scapegoat, and marking the first seconds of Caleb Sterling, the gardener of his own life. I did not look back. Boda. There was only the hollow silence where the anxiety used to be. It was like a fever breaking. The heat of the conflict was gone, leaving only absolute clarity. The ledger was open, and the accounting was about to begin. Try to Sabota. The rain that hammered the greenhouse glass now hammered the windshield of my car, a metronome counting down the seconds of my old life. The cold had finally breached my coat, but I welcomed the discomfort. It was real. It was honest. Otta. I drove the 40 minutes to my studio apartment on the east side. I did not run the red lights or speed. Running would have implied panic, and panic was weakness. I was functioning on a clear, analytical high. The old Boda, familiar terror of disappointing Robert and Susan, the terror that had been a constant companion since childhood, was gone. It had vacated my body, leaving behind a hollow silence where the anxiety used to be. I was operating on pure logistics. Behind me, the open greenhouse door was a black rectangle against the glowing glass. I kept replaying the physics in my head, confirming the schedule of destruction. I had designed the environment. I knew its failure points better than anyone. It would take only a few hours for the ambient cold to achieve cellular rupture in the tropicals. The prized Cattleya orchids, temperamental and high maintenance, would be the first to suffer the irreversible damage. The inventory loss would be comprehensive. Not just the physical flowers, but the reputation. The kind of specialized, high-end nursery Robert ran depended entirely on an air of exclusivity and perfection. Loss of the entire stock was not just a deficit, it was the end of the brand. I pulled into the small parking spot behind my industrial space, Boda. The studio was 400 square feet of repurposed brick and concrete, but I had paid for every inch of it with money I earned from design projects my parents never saw and never cared to ask about. I unlocked the door. The air inside smelled of clean lemon oil and potting soil, a stark contrast to the cloying, over-fertilized humidity of the greenhouse. My plants, my real plants, were thriving here. Monstera deliciosa vines climbed the exposed brick, their huge, perforated leaves reaching for the window light. Ferns cascaded from shelves. They did not demand I bleed for them. They just required the simple, true equation of water and light. They required competence. I took off my wet coat. My phone buzzed in my pocket once, twice, a barrage. I took it out and looked at the screen. Robert, Ashley, Susan. Robert again. I did not read the messages. I did not answer. That part of the drama was irrelevant. Their panic was merely background noise to my operation. My movements were precise, almost robotic. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the bank portal. The financial ledger was where the real severance needed to be finalized. I navigated to the standing transfer order. It was for $2,800, scheduled for the first of the month. Rent for their luxury apartment downtown, which they told their friends was a savvy downsize. An apartment they could not and had never been able to afford. I clicked cancel. A confirmation window popped up, asking, "Are you sure?" I did not hesitate. Yes, I was sure. I was closing the ledger. Next, I opened the business license registry. I had started the paperwork months ago. A failsafe I had been too cowardly to execute. I finished the digital form to remove myself as the registered agent for Green Leaf Gardens. I signed it digitally and hit submit. The screen flashed processing. This was not revenge. Revenge was messy and emotional. This was simply accounting. I was closing the chapter on a bad investment, liquidating the asset that was my own labor, BOTA, and ensuring that any financial or legal fallout from the nursery's inevitable collapse would not touch me. BOTA. I sat back in my chair and listened to the comforting sound of the rain against my own window, my private window. For 29 years, I had been the structural support beam for a crumbling building. Tonight, I had walked away. I was just going to let gravity and their sheer financial incompetence do the rest of the work. The silence that settled over me was heavy, but for the first time, it did not feel lonely. It felt like a clean, empty slate ready for a new blueprint. The system was broken. The old life was canceled. Bada. Sitting in the dark, the air smelled of my own thriving plants and lemon oil, a scent that only highlighted the stench of the system I had just broken. I let the memories come, not to hurt myself, but to witness the evidence. I needed to see the architecture of my own erasure. It started when I was about 12. Boda. I remembered the sheer weight of the fertilizer bags. 50 pounds of nitrogen and bone meal, digging into my shoulders. I was hauling them from the delivery truck to the storage shed, maneuvering through thick November mud. My father, Robert, had watched from the porch, sipping iced tea, a picture of leisurely detachment. "Good for your character, Caleb," he would call out. "Builds grit." Meanwhile, inside the climate-controlled sunroom, Ashley was often taking private posture lessons or meeting with tutors to shape her into the perfect golden child. Robert and Susan would often say, "We have to protect her potential." That was the dynamic. I was the mule. Ashley was the show pony. I was built for labor and competence. She was built for display and fragility. I was the structural support beam, absorbing all the weight and stress so the elegant facade could stand. For years, I rationalized it. I told myself they simply did not understand the business. Green Leaf Gardens was supposed to be a high-end boutique brand, but the math never worked. They bought imported Italian terracotta pots that sat unsold for years. They leased delivery vans they did not need. They hired consultants to rebrand the logo 3 times in a decade. The red ink was a river, and I was the dam, silently plugging the holes with my own salary. I took over the payroll when I was 19 because the IRS threatened a lion, Boda. I restructured the antiquated inventory systems during my college breaks. And for the last 5 years, I had been the silent, unpaid partner who kept the lights on. Their luxury apartment downtown, 2 bedrooms, river view, $2,800 a month, was the ultimate manifestation of the illusion. Boda. They told their friends it was a savvy downsize to focus on Ashley's career. They did not tell anyone that I paid the rent every single month. My substantial salary as a landscape architect did not go to vacations, designer clothes, or an early retirement fund. It went entirely to maintaining the lie of their success. I used to think it was simple incompetence or just bad luck. I used to think if I just worked harder, if I fixed one more crisis, they would finally look up and truly see me. I craved that simple nod of paternal pride. But sitting there in the dark, and the truth clicked into place. It was not an accident. It was a system. I had read about it during sleepless nights, poring over psychology journals. The narcissistic family system. It requires two distinct, non-negotiable roles to function. The golden child, who serves as the projection of the parent's ego, their vanity, their desire to be envied. Ashley was not a person to them, sabotage. She was a mirror reflecting how special they wanted to be. And then there is the scapegoat, the container for their shame, their laziness, their failures. That was me. They did not hate me, Boda. They projected their financial incompetence and their deep-seated inability to perform labor onto me, a Boda, so they could feel superior while simultaneously relying entirely on my competence to survive. They crippled Ashley by doing everything for her, ensuring she would never successfully leave them. And they burdened me by making me do everything for them, ensuring I would never feel free enough to leave. It was a perfect, parasitic machine. But tonight, the machine was broken. I had physically and financially removed the gear that turned the wheel. I looked at my hands, strong and capable, calloused from years of handling soil and stone. And for the first time in 29 years, they were empty of everyone else's baggage. The internal conflict over why they treated me this way was finally resolved. It was not an oversight, it was design. 2 days later, the quiet of my studio was broken not by fear, but by the relentless buzzing of the phone, a sound that signaled the beginning of the harvest. I was at my desk, sketching a concept for a complex xeriscape project in the high desert, focused on water conservation and drought resistance. The contrast was not lost on me, designing for life that thrives in adversity while the life I had artificially sustained withered away. I knew exactly what was happening at Greenleaf Gardens. I had designed the automated irrigation system myself. It was a complex, delicate network of solenoids, pressure regulators, and moisture sensors that required daily, manual calibration to counteract the Portland region's hard water. Without those precise adjustments, the calcium deposits would clog the misting nozzles within 48 hours. The tropicals, the calatheas, the alocasias, and of course, the fragile orchids would be the first to suffer, turning a sicklied brown at the edges as they suffocated in the dry, heated air. My phone screen lit up. It had been quiet for almost 24 hours, a tense ceasefire while they presumably scrambled to figure out why the bank had rejected the rent payment, or why their inventory software was locked. But now, the physical panic had begun. A text from Robert popped up. There was no greeting, no question about my well-being, just a pure, breathtaking demand. The misting system in Zone 4 is down. The orchids are dropping buds. Get over here and fix the valves now. I stared at the message. The sheer entitlement was almost beautiful in its purity. He did not ask what was wrong. Otta. He simply assumed that my labor was a utility he could switch back on, like flipping a light switch or opening a tap. He assumed that even in exile, even after my definitive walkout, I was still his mechanic. He still believed he was my employer, my master, Boda. He did not realize that I had fired him and that the terms of my employment were now permanently non-negotiable. Boda. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the heat anchor me, and continued sketching the intricate layering of the desert garden design. 10 minutes later, another text. This time, a photo. It was a horrifying close-up of a prize Vanda orchid, its vibrant purple petals limp and shriveled like old paper. "Look what you are doing," he wrote. "You are destroying the inventory. This is thousands of dollars. Stop this tantrum and do your job." My job. He still thought it was my job to protect his assets from his own profound negligence. Then came Ashley. Her messages were a frantic stream of consciousness, completely devoid of any awareness of the collapse surrounding her. "Caleb, seriously? Mom is crying in the kitchen because Dad is yelling about valves. I have my call back for the agency in 3 hours. 3 hours. I cannot deal with this negative energy right now. My skin is going to break out. You need to come fix this so I can focus." I read it twice, so I can focus. Even as the family business crumbled around them, the priorities remained identical to 20 years ago. Ashley's comfort. Ashley's potential. Ashley's perfect, marketable skin. The plants were dying. Their livelihood was evaporating. And her only concern was that the noise of the financial and botanical collapse was distracting her from her audition. It was a perfect, sickening microcosm of our entire lives. I was the one holding the umbrella, keeping the rain off them, Boda, and they were annoyed that my arm was shaking. I felt a ghost of the old guilt, a reflex trained into me over 2 decades of servitude. I knew exactly which valve was stuck, which solenoid had failed. I knew I could drive over there, bypass the system with a simple wrench, and save the crop in 20 minutes. I could stop the shouting. I could smooth the waters and revert to the comforting pain of the known system. But then I looked up at my own thriving plants in the corner of my apartment. Green, lush, completely dependent on the competence I provided. They were healthy because I tended to them. The nursery was dying because the who owned it did not know how to care for living things. They only knew how to harvest them for vanity and profit. I did not block their numbers yet. I wanted the record. I wanted the evidence of their priorities saved for posterity. I took a high resolution screenshot of the texts. Robert's command, Ashley's pathetic complaint, and saved them to a new folder on my laptop labeled The End. I watched the phone buzz again. Robert was calling. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I imagined him standing in the humid, failing greenhouse, red-faced and sweating, Boda, surrounded by thousands of dollars of dying flowers, finally realizing that his shouting could not make the water flow. He was a king in a sugar castle, and it was starting to rain. I turned my phone face down. The silence returned, heavy and sweet. Let them wither. It was the only way they would learn that I was the water. The silence returned, but I knew this was only the eye of the storm. The calls and texts had stopped, Boda, replaced by the humming stillness of people scrambling to fill a void they did not understand. Boda. It was time to trade the drafting pencil for the pen of the prosecutor. First, I met with Marcus Harris, one of the senior partners at the architectural firm where I worked. He was a charismatic man in his 50s, known for his shrewd, almost ruthless business sense. I did not tell him the specifics, only that I was separating myself from a messy, years-long family business entanglement. Protect your assets, Caleb. Marcus advised, looking over the downtown cityscape from his corner office. In these situations, blood only makes the paper trail messier. Don't let emotion cost you a decade of effort. You're too good for that. He was the neutral voice of authority I needed, someone who validated my competence without the crippling emotional strings of family. He challenged my guarded nature without trying to fix me. He saw the cold competence beneath the trauma, Boda, and his quiet trust was more grounding than any therapy session could have been. The next morning, I went to the downtown branch of my personal bank. It was one of those large, corporate buildings with marble floors and a heavy, vaulted lobby that gave the illusion of absolute, immutable solidity. I needed that feeling of permanence. Boda. I sat across from a loan officer named Sarah, a calm woman who had helped me with my own mortgage for the studio. I need to close the joint emergency fund, I told her, my voice precise. And I need to revoke all third-party authorization on my primary accounts. Today, right now. Sarah typed for a moment, her face neutral, trained for these moments of messy financial finality. But I saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Pity, perhaps, or recognition of the financial hemorrhage I had been stemming for years. Don't, she said, sliding a thick paper across the desk. You are the only authorized signer as of 2 a.m. I signed the paper. The ink looked black, heavy, and permanent. It felt like signing a death certificate, not for a person, but for a role. The devoted son was dead. The financier was dead. All that was left was Caleb. From the bank, I drove to a small, worn diner on the far outskirts of the city to meet my Aunt Patricia, Boda. She was Robert's older sister, the only person in the family who had seen Robert and Susan for exactly what they were. She had been estranged from my father for years, ever since she called him a pompous fool at a Christmas party in 2018. She was waiting in a vinyl booth, a cup of black coffee in front of her, and a cardboard banker's box resting on the seat beside her. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. You look terrible, she said. Coming from Patricia, it was a high compliment. It meant I looked authentic. I left, I said simply. I cut them off. Good, she nodded. It took you long enough? Dying probably. Robert called me to fix the valves. Of course he did. He thinks he owns your hands. She pushed the cardboard box toward me. It smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I saved this from your grandmother's house when she passed. Robert wanted to throw it all in a skip. Said it was just clutter. But I knew he didn't read any of it. I did. What is it? I asked. Evidence, she said grimly. But before you look at that, are you okay? The question caught me off guard. My throat tightened. I looked out the window at the gray Portland sky, unable to answer immediately. Was I okay? No. I felt like I had amputated a limb. A gangrenous limb poisoning my blood, perhaps, but still a part of me. I feel guilty, I admitted, the sound of my voice cracking making me feel exposed. I feel like I'm killing them. You are not killing them, Caleb. Patricia said, her voice firm, holding no room for self-pity. You are just burying the hope that they will ever change. That was the truth. It pierced me like a needle. I was not crying for the loss of Robert and Susan. I knew exactly who they were: selfish, small people who viewed their children as assets. I was crying for the parents I had invented in my head to survive, the father who was proud of my designs, the mother who protected me. Boda. I was holding a funeral for a fantasy. I had to grieve the living as if they were dead because the people I needed them to be had never existed at all. I'm done hoping, I said, wiping my face with a paper napkin. Good, Patricia confirmed. Because what is in here will make sure you never hope again. Open it. I opened the banker's box. It was filled with mundane detritus, old receipts, tax returns from the 90s, and dried floral arrangements. But near the bottom, tucked inside a heavy cream-colored envelope, was a file folder, labeled in my grandmother's spidery handwriting, for Caleb to Bloom. My breath hitched. I pulled it out. The folder was heavy. I opened it, and the first thing I saw was a copy of a trust document. My grandmother had established a fund before she died, specifically designated for Caleb's future botanical enterprise. She had seen my sketches. She had known my dream long before I had the courage to speak it aloud. I turned the page to the account statement. Bada. The balance, as of 5 years ago, was $150,000. $150,000. The room spun slightly. That money would have changed everything. It would have paid off my student loans. It would have bought the land I was currently saving pennies for. It was freedom, sitting in an account with my name on it. Then I saw the next page, a transaction record. The entire balance had been liquidated on February 14th, 2019. A single wire transfer. My hands began to shake violently as I picked up the photocopy of the withdrawal slip. At the bottom, on the signature line, was my name, Caleb. But it was not my signature. The loops on the B were too wide. The flourish on the tail of the final letter was too excessive. It looked exactly like someone trying to copy my hand, but unable to suppress their own vanity. It looked exactly like my mother's handwriting. It wasn't just a copy, it was a forgery betrayed by her own vanity in the flourish of the signature. I stared at the date again, February 2019. Boda. The memory clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. That was the month Ashley moved to Los Angeles to pursue lifestyle modeling. She had rented a penthouse in West Hollywood for 6 months. She had hired a personal brand consultant. They had told me she won a talent grant. They had not just favored her. They had robbed me to fund her delusions. A coldness spread through my chest, freezing the last of my guilt and sadness. This was not just bad parenting. This was not just a toxic dynamic. This was grand larceny. This was a felony. They had looked at my future, my grandmother's gift to me, Boda, and decided it was better spent on Ashley's Instagram aesthetic. I placed the paper down on the table next to my coffee. The trembling in my hands stopped. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a steely forensic calm. I was not a son anymore. I was a victim of fraud, and I was holding the smoking gun. I took out my phone and took a high-resolution photograph of the forged slip. Then I called the police non-emergency line. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply stated the facts. I would like to report a theft, I said. I have the documents. They wanted a war. They wanted to call me selfish for leaving. Fine. I would show them what selfish looked like. I would show them the precise cost of stealing a life. A week later, the financial harvest came due, and the two people Caleb never wanted to see again walked into the pristine, minimalist lobby of my architectural firm. My phone call to the police non-emergency line had been purely informational. A declaration of intent. Bauta. I had provided the initial details and promised the full documentation would follow soon. I wanted the fraud unit to be interested, to be prepared. I wanted the legal hammer hovering, but I was going to use the threat, not the execution, to achieve my final goal. Bauta. I was in the middle of a design review with the senior partners. We were standing around a massive drafting table discussing the load-bearing requirements for a complex rooftop garden on a skyscraper when the receptionist buzzed in. Caleb, she said, her voice tight with professional strain, there are some people here to see you. They say they're your parents. I told them you were in a meeting, but they're insisting. I felt the blood drain from my face, then rush back, hot and fast, not with panic, but with focused adrenaline. This was it. This was the confrontation I had planned for, the one where the illusion finally met the unyielding wall of reality. I'll handle it, I said to the partners. My apologies. Give me 5 minutes. Marcus Harris, who had been listening intently, gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod from across the table. Bauta. His expression was stern and professional, but there was a flicker of warning in his eyes. Stay professional, stay safe. Bauta. I walked into the lobby. It was a sleek space of glass and polished concrete, silent, except for the low hum of the heating, ventilation, Bauta, and air conditioning system. And there they were, Robert and Susan, standing by the reception desk like a sudden, ugly stain on a white shirt. They looked terrible. They had been evicted 3 days ago. I knew because the leasing office had emailed me a courtesy notification as the former guarantor. Now, their polished facade had cracked. Robert's custom-tailored shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven, the bluster of the greenhouse gone, replaced by desperation. Susan was wearing a heavy, expensive coat that looked far too warm for the weather, clutching her purse with white, knuckled intensity. Their eyes were wide, panicked, and utterly accusatory. They looked like refugees from their own lives. When Robert saw me, he straightened up, Bauta, trying to summon the old authority, the commanding voice he used when ordering me to fix a broken pump or adjust a delivery schedule. Caleb, he boomed, his voice echoing uncomfortably in the quiet, professional space. This has gone on long enough. You need to stop this tantrum right now. We have nowhere to go. The receptionist immediately reached for the phone, looking at me for a cue to call security. I held up a hand. Not yet. I wanted this audience. You're causing a scene, I said, my voice low and even, a careful contrast to his shouting. Leave? We are not leaving till you fix this? Susan cried out, tears already welling up in a performance that used to gut me. We are your parents? How can you be so cruel? We're sleeping in a motel. Robert snarled, stepping closer, closing the distance. The smell of cheap motel air and old desperation hit me. You have money? He hissed. I know what you make. You're going to write us a check and you're going to co-sign a new lease. Today, I am your father and I demand you show some respect. He truly believed it. He believed that his title, S. Father, Sabota, was a currency that never devalued, regardless of his actions. He believed that the lifetime of labor he had stolen, the emotional abuse he had meted out, and the financial catastrophe he had caused could all be wiped clean by invoking a single, meaningless title. It was fascinating in a horrific way. It was the illusion of the empty wallet. For years, Boda, they had worn their status like expensive clothing, strutting around as successful business owners, generous parents, and pillars of the community. But that status was leased. It was rented with my money, my labor, and my silence. Now that the funding had stopped, the costume had fallen away, revealing the empty, pathetic people underneath. They had not built anything. They were nothing without someone else to consume. Respect? I asked. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Is that what you call grand larceny? Robert froze. His posture, the attempted rigidity, instantly failed. What? He rasped. Caleb knew the moment for false diplomacy was over. Robert's eyes, which moments before had held the fierce, entitled gleam of a landowner addressing a servant, were now wide with pure, animal terror. His face had gone from red to a terrifying shade of gray. Robert had understood the word. Larceny. I reached into my portfolio, pulling out a single sheet of paper, the high-resolution photocopy of the forged withdrawal slip from the trust fund. I held it up, flat and unbending in the sterile office light. February 14th, 2019. I stated, my voice echoing the clinical precision I used when dictating specifications to a contractor. $150,000 wire transferred to an account in Los Angeles. Susan made a sharp, high-pitched sound. A wounded noise, like a gasp that had been trapped in her lungs for years. She finally stepped out from behind Robert. I didn't sign this. I continued, tapping the forgery with a fingernail. You did, Susan. And you spent it on Ashley's brand consultant and a penthouse she got evicted from in 6 months. That money was my grandmother's legacy. It was my future. Caleb, please. Susan whispered, her voice trembling, reaching out a shaking hand as if to snatch the evidence. With what? I asked, taking a defensive step back. With the profits from the business I was running for free. With the rent money I was paying for your apartment. All those years, every single design fee, every contract I secured, it all went into maintaining your lie. And then, you stole my foundation to build Ashley's vanity project. I took another step forward, and for the first time in my life, I saw them truly flinch. They were small. They were terrified. Boda. They were criminals who had just realized the judge was standing directly in front of them, holding the evidence of their crime. Their illusion of being generous, loving, successful parents had just imploded, leaving them exposed as two financially incompetent and deeply selfish people who viewed fraud as a simple accounting trick. I've already spoken to the police, I said. I watched Robert's eyes jumped to the firm's receptionist, who was now holding the phone, ready to dial. The fraud unit is very interested in this document. It's a Class B felony. Minimum mandatory sentencing. Robert opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The bluster was gone. The entitlement was gone. There was only the cold, hard reality of consequences looming over him. He wasn't a master anymore, he was a desperate man facing a cell. You wouldn't? Robert rasped, finally finding his voice, but it was thin, weak. We're your family. I don't have a family. I stated, Bada. The finality of the words sinking into the polished concrete of the lobby floor. I have a landscaping project that required extensive pruning. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, savoring the earned control of the moment. You have 24 hours, I said. The ultimatum was a hammer blow. If you are still in this city by this time tomorrow, I file the formal charges. I will send you to prison. Susan began to sob. Not the theatrical weeping I remembered from the kitchen, but a genuine, terrified, guttural sound. I turned to the receptionist, meeting her gaze steadily. You can call security now. I didn't watch them leave. That part of the drama was no longer my concern. I simply turned my back and walked toward the elevators, heading back up to the drafting room. Marcus met my eyes as I passed, and in his face, I saw quiet respect, not pity. The transaction was complete. Boda. The final cost of my liberation was the deliberate destruction of their manufactured lives. I had been the structural support beam, and now that I was gone, the facade had crashed down with nothing to stop it. I was free. I didn't watch them go. Boda. I walked toward the elevators, leaving the silence of the lobby clean and unbroken, knowing the most difficult labor was now behind me. The rest was just paperwork and persistence. 6 months later, the harvest of their failure was complete. Green Leaf Gardens was gone, sold for parts. The massive glass from the greenhouse I once loved was auctioned off to a cannabis grower in Washington. Boda. The land itself was sold to a developer to pay the IRS, the creditors, and the overwhelming legal fees associated with the financial inquiries. Robert and Susan avoided prison only because I agreed to a plea deal that my lawyer negotiated, leveraging the evidence I had collected. They pleaded guilty to financial fraud, paid partial restitution from the sale of the land, Boda, and accepted a permanent restraining order forbidding contact with me. Boda. I heard through Aunt Patricia that Robert was forced to take a job as a night security guard at a warehouse. Boda. He wears a cheap uniform and checks identifications for $28 an hour. Boda. Susan sells vegetables at a farmer's market on weekends for a local co-op. Boda. Learning how to handle actual cash transactions and talk to real customers. Ashley is working as a barista in Seattle, sharing a tiny studio apartment with 3 other people. They are learning for the very first time in their lives the true dignity of labor. They are learning that food does not simply appear on the table by magic. It appears by sweat, by accountability, and by the relentless pressure of consequence. I did not take the restitution money to buy a car or a vacation, or to upgrade my small studio. I used it, along with my own savings, to buy 5 acres of raw land in the Willamette Valley. It is overgrown, wild, and messy. It needs clearing. It needs grading. It needs years of hard work, planning, and meticulous design. It is completely, irrevocably mine. I stood in the center of the field yesterday. The soft spring rain fell gently on my face, washing away the residue of the past 6 months. This land, this wild, untamed 5 acres, was my future's first breath. I knelt down and dug my hands into the earth. It was cold and wet and real, unlike the artificially controlled soil of the greenhouse. I planted the first seed. It was a native oak, a species known to be slow, growing, strong, and deep-rooted. Robert was right about one thing. I was born to tend the soil. But he was utterly wrong about the purpose. I was not born to help Ashley bloom. I was not born to be the fertilizer for someone else's garden. I was born to be the gardener of my own life. I patted the soil down over the seed. I didn't look back at the past, at the ghosts of resentment, or the phantom limb of guilt. I looked forward at the empty field, waiting to be filled with the blueprints of my own design, built on a foundation I finally owned. It was going to be hard work. It was going to take years, and I could not wait to get started. My internal arc was complete. Boda, the calculated individual, the man who only trusted cold, hard logistics, had finally embraced the vulnerability of planting something real and honest, from the ground up, for himself. The soil was finally his.